capitalism, all of the gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have to do is have everyone be an owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming.
There is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multi-families that do passive design.
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that a bigger number? Or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know, Zach.
It's a tough one. I
It's
know.
really hard.
And maybe comparing numbers is not Jeremy's strong suit. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. Welcome back, everybody, to Bread Theory. Tonight we're going to continue on in our series covering A People's History of the United States, the audio book. And joining me tonight is the lovely Amanda, my wife. How you doing tonight, Amanda?
Oh, I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Oh my God, I think we might need to shut that window. It's incredibly loud. What? What are you getting upset for?
Because.
Okay.
Hi.
So you ready to wrap up this section on the Civil War?
I'll try.
Yeah, it's not a pleasant subject by any stretch.
Most of the things that are covered on this show are not pleasant, but need to be discussed.
Yeah, that's kind of our theme, especially with this book, because that's like basically the entire book. Unpleasant, but important truths.
It's much more important than concerning yourself over M&M's wearing high heels or not.
Oh no, they're not quite as sexy in those flats. I don't feel that same tingle in my loins every time I look at a flat shoot M&M.
I don't think I'm buying you M&M's anymore. I didn't realize.
Well, that was Tucker Carlson's main beef with the whole change.
Oh, come
But
on.
now he's off the air, so
He's
what
just
does it
taking a
say?
break.
Yeah,
He'll be back.
I'm sure he'll pop up at OAN or Newsmax or one of those.
Daily Wire.
I don't know that the Daily Wire. He's pretty anti-Semitic, like maybe even too much for Benny Boys.
But he would bring in a new
Taste.
viewership.
It's true. It's
To usher in
true.
the new era of conservative bullshit.
Yeah.
Not that there isn't bullshit from the Democrats, but we can get into that later.
Yeah. No, I'm sure he'll land on his feet somewhere, and I mean, he's already rich. He could just never pop up in public life again, and that would probably be the best of all possible worlds.
Not how they operate, though.
No, they're very egotistical. It's no longer, a matter of needing more money to do whatever you want in your life. It's just amassing a number so you can show off to your friends and feel superior. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into the story. Always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
I forget how excellent of a phrase that is.
What phrase? What are you talking about? Carpetbaggers with various mixtures of humanitarianism? Carpetbaggers, you like that one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's gonna be my insult of the week.
Freaking carpetbaggers. Okay. Let's get into
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Yeah. Yeah, somehow I doubt that old Abby's ever going to cover something with this much weight to it. You know. Doesn't quite have the same appeal to her as talking down to every other woman. Let's see. So if you need to find the link to the source video, it is in the description. You can always find that on the YouTube channel later on after it's been posted. And otherwise, yeah, have any questions, feel free to ask. It's a place of learning. That's what we're all here for. And the only dumb question is the one asked in bad faith. The only bad question, I should say. So, yeah, let's back up just a little bit so we can remind ourselves, because it's been a couple weeks since we've done this series. Gotta remind ourselves where we were at. So basically, we were talking about getting into the beginning of the Civil War, I believe. I think this is what the rest of the chapter is going to be about. I need to make sure to update or make it go a little faster. So we have. So we got a little more. We got about 45 minutes to cover. That's going to be a big ask for tonight, so it's probably going to go into a part 6, but we're going to do our best.
To ourselves.
We'll see.
And we still
What?
had to depend on the southern white man for work, food, and clothing. And he held us out of necessity and want in a state of servitude, but little better than slavery.
So this is a southern poor person during the time before the Civil War who's talking about their condition, their living conditions. How basically they didn't. I mean, for a lot of the South, cities didn't really develop until much later than in the North because there just wasn't a need for it. There wasn't a need to have a big pool of labor because you had slaves, and that drove the economy. Even if it was a small percentage of people that actually owned them, they owned almost the entirety of the wealth in the South. And it was very hard for everyone else who did not own other people. Because you can't really beat that, you know? Can't really beat working for free. It's kind of hard to undercut that as a worker. So they didn't really have much to sell to the business owners. What are you laughing about?
I'm just thinking about working for free.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Anyway.
Get your money for nothing.
The American government had set out to fight the slave states in 1861, not to end slavery, but to retain the enormous national territory and market and resources.
Right.
Yet, victory required a crusade, and the momentum of that crusade brought new forces into national politics. More blacks determined to make their freedom mean something. More whites, whether Freedmen's Bureau officials or teachers in the Sea Islands or carpetbaggers with various mixtures of humanitarianism and personal ambition, concerned with racial equity. There was also the powerful interest of the Republican Party in maintaining control over the national government, with the prospect of Southern black votes to accomplish this. Northern businessmen, seeing Republican policies as...
This is the part where the modern day conservatives are like, see, it was the Republicans that freed the slaves and they were anti-slavery and stuff like that. And yeah, it looks like you have some thoughts. Go ahead. It's a dumb argument. I mean, first of all,
dumb because they've clearly switched sides, but we don't talk about that part.
oh no, they never switched sides. That's not a thing. Blah 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 blah. Okay, why do you have to go back, 150, 160 years
to make a GD point
to talk about the last time that you guys did something for people other than white people? Kind of telling, like, what are you doing lately in that regard? Who are the people that were the... Well, I mean, who were the people that stood against the Civil Rights Act more than any others? And there's definitely Democrats against it because that was before the Dixiecrats got booted out, which is really what caused the Republicans to make a very hard rightward shift. So all the old Dixiecrats.
hard.
Yeah, hard.
Hard.
Anyway, so...
That's a fun word to say.
Anyway, they were expelled from the Democratic Party, making the Republican Party much more conservative. So that's where it's not as though they just like one day got together and they were playing a game of kickball and loser had to be the conservatives. It's they kicked out their most reactionary wing, and where are they going to go but to the other side?
And that's why the two-party system sucks.
I mean, that's one of the many reasons why the two-party system sucks. Because what other choice you got now? If you care even a little bit about racial minorities and women and gender minorities, then you pretty much only have one option, even if it's still a really terrible option that doesn't tend to do much. Because the other one just is actively against them, and now is getting to the point where they're making it illegal to be trans, and illegal to have abortions. Like, They want absolute control over everybody, and they want only themselves to have power.
I just want to say something on the trans issue.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a message for the whole community, okay? Everybody.
Yeah.
Every single person. And this is something we probably talked about in kindergarten before. You need to worry about you.
Yeah.
You need to worry about your own genitals.
Mind your business.
Mind your bobber.
Yeah.
Okay?
Let people live their lives. Like
It literally impacts you 0%,
Right.
especially in this capitalistic society where all of the financial burden and everything else falls to them. Get over it. If they want to serve in the military to get what they want, guess what? They serve the country that you love so freaking much. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Shut up, take your ball, and leave.
Yeah, right. Like all they want is the right to exist and not be harassed for their identity. I don't think that's a whole lot to ask. They're not asking for like special anything. So
Normalize introducing yourself with your pronouns. I'm working on that.
yeah, that's going to be a hard thing to integrate more widely. It's just
But if we
just something to get
started
used to.
doing it-
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I'm sure by
But
the time Gen Z is in charge, then that'll
If you
be
don't
much more
know, ask.
commonplace.
It's not hard.
Not very
Most
hard.
people aren't going to get upset if you're like, hey, what pronouns do you like to use?
And if they are, well,
Or you
I mean,
preferred.
that's too bad. There's
You
going to
probably
be
don't want to talk to
there's
them
going to
anyway.
be plenty of social interactions in your life with people you know and strangers and whatever that are going to be uncomfortable, and it's just part of being a human.
And if you ever interact with me, you know it's just going to be weird. So,
Yeah, it's always weird with you. Yeah.
do we have a
Anyway.
chatter?
Yes, we do. Welcome, Alyosha. I'll shout you out in just a second here. Thanks for the bits. Really appreciate it. Everyone should go check out Alyosha's stream. Let me just shout you out right now, in fact. Really cool guy who mostly covers U.S. politics. On the federal level. So go check him out. How you doing tonight, Allie? Did you have a happy May Day? I was planning on going to the May Day parade. I look forward to it every year. And every year, for some reason, well, and I know the reason. It's because it's the busiest time of year for people that like plants and landscaping and stuff like that. Instead, we got all our house plants out onto the deck and put up shelving and hooks. And I set up a wine barrel out there. I'm planning on making some videos on that process. I'm going to turn a wine barrel into a container garden, and I'm going to drill some holes in the side of it to add more plants, and I'm going to have a worm tower running through the middle of it and collect compost and
He's going to Jesus our house.
stuff like that. You said I'm going to Jesus our house?
Yeah.
I don't understand.
You're going to turn the water into wine.
Turn the wine into worm tea, basically.
And then the Lord our Christ Savior stuff will come.
Okay. Anyway, that took a weird turn, but no, we're going to grow a whole bunch of food in a very small space and going to see how it goes. We're going to use as little plastic as possible.
But we have our hydroponic tower still.
Yeah. So we're going to try that too. But just when I make stuff, I prefer to not use plastic. Because no matter what kind of plastic it is, even if it says like food safe and that, it still leaches stuff into the water, into the food for the duration of its lifetime. So I'd rather not have that. I probably eat enough credit cards worth of plastic just in my normal food a week. Don't need to up that.
Listen, I cut back both the sugar and the credit cards in the bread that I made this weekend. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well that's true actually. Yeah, like, she makes the absolute best homemade bread. It tastes so good. The only drawback is that it's very fleeting. You gotta eat it pretty quickly, otherwise it gets
That's how you know
better
it's
used as a doorstop.
the food that you should eat. That's what my doctor says.
Yeah, and I mean the rate that we're going through it, there's gonna be no problem with that. But
Leave me alone.
no, it's great. It's great to have something that's so delicious and right at hand. Anyway, let's get back to the story. Talk about not as fun things. So yeah, so we were talking about how Republicans like to hang their hat on this part of history, and again, that argument's just defeated. why do you got to go back that far? Why do you got to go back 160 years to show your bona fides for helping out minorities?
Because it's the last
How,
place you had it.
right? Yeah, and that's the actual answer. Um, anyway.
Beneficial to them went along for a while. The result was that brief period after the Civil War in which Southern Negroes voted, elected blacks to state legislatures and to Congress, introduced free and racially mixed public education to the South. A legal framework was constructed.
Yeah, it happened very quickly, and it was going very progressively for that early period of Reconstruction.
Isn't that N-word supposed to be edited?
No. That's. I mean, I'm not going to say it just because it's too close, but
Right.
no, he was
Okay.
only the slur is being edited in this audiobook, not the old timey
Okay.
way of referring to black people.
I'm just not using any of it. I just
No, it's
wasn't
fine.
sure. So thought I'd say something.
Yeah.
The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery. Quote, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall...
Kind of a gaping loophole there, that except for if the party is
Prison.
duly convicted of a crime. So yeah, so it is legal to make slaves of prisoners. And hey, as soon as they caught on to that fact, there was a much greater incentive on the part of white racists to imprison as many black people as possible so they could basically have their slaves back.
And that's how the penal system was formed.
Yeah, it's largely how it works today too. People in society you don't like, you come up with bogus but legally defensible reasons of locking them up, and then you do it en masse, and then they're just out of society. And I mean, there still is prison slavery, and there's prison near slavery where people are working for like 10 cents an hour, stuff like that.
Workers for sale or rent.
Yeah, right.
exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, unquote. The 14th Amendment repudiated the pre-war Dred Scott decision by declaring that, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, unquote, were citizens. It also seemed to make a powerful statement for racial equality, severely limiting states' rights. Quote, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws.
Equal protection. The Equal Protection Clause, which, like so many things when it was originally written, because no one thought of certain people and certain genders as being equal, it referred to basically, I mean, in practice it referred to white men, but over time it has been used to pry open that freedom to more and more people, and that equal protection to more and more people. Eventually it was used to help justify the Civil Rights Act and voting suffrage and all sorts of things. Because it's kind of hard to have equal protection if you legally can discriminate.
Even then, it wasn't enough because women of color didn't get the right to vote until much, much later.
Yeah, that's true.
The 15th Amendment said, quote, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Congress passed a number of laws in the 1860s and early 1870s in the same spirit, laws making it a crime to deprive Negroes of their rights, requiring of federal officials to enforce those rights, giving Negroes the right to enter contracts and buy property without discrimination. And in 1875, a Civil Rights Act outlawed the exclusion of Negroes from hotels, theaters, railroads, and other public accommodations. With these laws, With the Union Army in the South as protection and a civilian army of officials in the Freedmen's Bureau to help them, Southern Negroes came forward, voted, formed political organizations, and expressed themselves forcefully on issues important to them. They were hampered in this for several years by Andrew Johnson, vice president under Lincoln, who became president when Lincoln was assassinated at the close of the war. Johnson vetoed bills to help Negroes. He made it easy for Confederate states to come back into the Union.
So once again, we see the North capitulating and making concessions to the South. I'm sure it was in the name of binding up those wounds that Lincoln talked about, and reconstructing the country as one whole again. Just happens to be that at the same time it denies people's rights who you just freed and given more rights to. And this has been a pattern time and time again. You get a great leap forward in social progress and legal progress, and then there's the reaction to it.
Without guaranteeing equal rights to blacks. During his presidency, these returned Southern states enacted black codes, which made the freed slaves like serfs, still working the plantation. For instance, Mississippi in 1865 made it illegal for freedmen to rent or lease farmland.
So there you go. Legal discrimination per the law. Completely flying in the face of that amendment that gives equal protection. How did they do it? How do they justify it? Well, I don't know, but...
And provided for them to work under labor contracts which they could not break under penalty of prison. It also provided
You go to
that the
prison
courts...
for breaking a labor contract? Shit, that's probably where we're headed next.
Seems that way. Probably talk about bringing back the workhouse next, because nobody wants to work anymore. Too many freeloaders. Gotta get them off the streets and out of their parents' basements and threaten them with jail time. Unless they work for the owner class.
That's gross.
It is really gross. And yeah, I can see that happening. All the incredibly reactionary laws that have been passed over the
But
last
that
few
might
years.
impact a lot of males, and we don't seem that interested in causing harm.
It depends on what males we're talking about. Is it working class males? Then yeah, there may be some social stigma against denying them things, but politically, can they really compare to lobbyists and business interests and the owners, the thing that our Constitution was set up to protect? I don't know.
Well, it depends on how upset they are. I mean, they're petitioning for child labor in, what was it, Iowa or Wisconsin? One of the two.
Yeah, I believe it was Iowa. Yeah. I think that passed. I don't know.
It did. They had a very late night making a very difficult decision.
Yeah, but I think I'm not sure if it's signed into law yet. Let me look it up quick.
Just remember, if you have the baby,
You can't be the baby.
you can't be the baby.
All right. Looks like they did pass legislation to roll back child labor protections in Iowa.
What a proud
This from
moment.
CNN. Oh, it still has not been signed yet. If signed by Republican Governor Kim Reynolds, which, hey, seems like a layup for that constituency, who has expressed support for the measure, the bill would allow 14 and 15-year-olds to work 2 additional hours per day when school is in session. How are 14-year-olds even able to work at all? Like, I thought... I suppose with so many farmers, maybe that's how they get around that.
There's a lot of
then you can only
exceptions.
work for your own family's farm, I believe. But like, yeah, from 4 to 6 hours. They will also, like, could you imagine getting off school and having to work another 6 hours and then trying to do your homework and then
You're
go to
not
bed.
getting your homework done.
Yeah.
And then test scores are going to drop. And then it's, oh, the teachers suck. Like, has nothing to do with the teachers. It has to do with your shitty priorities.
It kind of all fits together in the Republican grand scheme of things, it seems. They want people to be dumb and obedient and just reproduce labor indefinitely.
Like,
So they have a free, dumb, easily controlled pool of labor to always draw from.
and again, this bothers me deeply. Like, I don't want to live in a stupid society.
No, I don't either.
I don't have any biological children, nor will I ever have any biological children of my own. But I would much rather live in a space where people are smart and have access to lots of resources so that they can become the best whatever the flying fuck they want to be.
I agree. I believe in empowering people, and I believe that the only way that anyone can ever have freedom is if they actually have the freedom to choose what they do with their life. If you are pushed into taking jobs that you hate for wages that don't support you, how much freedom can you actually possibly have? If you have to stack up 2-3 jobs just to survive,
Right.
how much freedom can you actually have? Freedom is just what? The freedom to say things, freedom to scream racial slurs on Xbox Live. Is that the freedom that we're fighting for? Because I think there's a much deeper and more meaningful version of freedom, and that's the freedom to choose your destiny. And unless you have any sort of meaningful choice, you can't really do that. And you can't really make a meaningful choice if there's no equivalent alternative. You know?
Mm-hmm. And all this of like, oh, they're trying to indoctrinate the kids. They're trying to indoctrinate the kids. Like, if we could indoctrinate your children, and let me be very clear, and I'm going to look right into the camera when I say this, they would do their classwork.
Right.
And they would hand it in on time.
Right.
That doesn't happen. So you can sleep well knowing your precious little McNavy is not being indoctrinated at school.
Well, yeah, and like the greatest influence on anyone's life is going to be the people that raise them. You know, that just tends to be how it is. People by and large follow the same religion as their parents, have more or less the same political beliefs as their parents. More or less, it happens more often than not. So I mean, you can use yourself as an example, but then you have 2 counter examples in your siblings. So
I don't want to talk about them.
But it's true, though. By and large, people
Yes.
follow the same traditions as their parents and think roughly the same sorts of things. It's part of, it's part of, it's just part of the material reality of where they grow up. You're going to be influenced by the place you grow up and the people and what they think. That's just how it is. So the idea that some radical teacher is going to take all of that and just dash it against the rocks and indoctrinate them into thinking whatever your woke boogeyman is
But also,
just ridiculous.
I would like to hear the opposite side. I would like to hear their hot, fresh takes.
Oh yeah, I listen to the other side all the time.
Because it helps me inform my own arguments and what might be tossed against me later. But it also just helps me understand where their values are.
Yeah.
To make my arguments stronger. But also, they're still human beings, even if they...
Yeah, even if they're just terrible human beings. But that's true.
You're still a person, even if you are a piece of shit. The more you know.
But back to the child labor thing. So apparently there's legislation, several bills across the country are pushing relaxing child labor practices.
Okay, then I don't want to hear nothing anymore about your kid not being smart enough because you force them to prioritize employment over education, okay? No, I really don't. I don't want to hear it, and then you can stop funding schools based off of test scores because there's only going to be a handful of kids that are actually invested in going to school. Okay?
Yeah. Now, Allie brings up a good point. Meanwhile, there's been over 199 mass shootings this year alone. Many of those are school shootings. Are they Are they eager to pass legislation about that? No. The GOP has no answers to that other than arming teachers and hardening schools and just
Panic
making it
rooms.
into prisons, basically.
But also, what part of the run, hide, fight, and all we focus on is the hide. Your first option is to try and get the hell out of there. Also,
Yeah.
okay, I have to add one more thing to that because you opened a Pandora's box and you're probably going to be sorry now.
That's okay.
So, with the school incidents that have been occurring, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure most people have heard about like all the lockdown drills and etc.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like tornado drill, fire drill, active shooter drill. Cool. They don't practice those during lunchtime. The time of day where most school incidents occur is during lunchtime because the regular staff usually aren't present. There's a lot of transitions, and it would be very easy for someone to move
Yeah.
in and out unseen.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. They should be more than anything, if they're going to change schools and how they're constructed, there should be more ways out of them very quickly. That's the number one way to prevent death from a person coming around and shooting people in enclosed spaces, is to allow people to exit as quickly as possible. You can't. It's much harder to go after targets if they're moving in 300 different directions at once.
But also, like, yeah, never mind.
But they don't do that. We have this cowboy mentality that we're gonna take down every shooter that threatens everything and throw rocks at them or have teachers shoot them, because how could that ever go wrong, to put guns inside the school to begin with. It's asinine the way that they do that. But instead, they're not even thinking about that. They're looking at ways to bring more children into the workforce because no one wants to work. They're going to use that excuse to push, virtually anything. No one wants to work anymore.
No
we
one
need people
wants
to
to
work.
work for
We need
$10
to
an
get
hour.
rid of this cushy social safety net that doesn't exist in America anymore. But the little bits that are there that give people just the tiniest bit of comfort, we got to get rid of it so that they'll have a reason to work and earn a living and stuff. They're just going to keep pushing on this.
It's a very foolish set of priorities.
Well, it's not from their point of view, because these are the
What are you
business
gonna-
owners and the people that want to be business owners.
But what do you do about the mental health crisis?
They don't care about the mental health crisis. They want to everyone that's weird or different to them, they would rather just lock up or put to work and have them shut up and be unable to do anything about it.
That's gross.
That would be their solution to the any problem, basically. Shut up or go away. I mean, literally, they say that sort of thing. Don't like America? Leave. I don't like your opinion there, so I'm gonna laugh when you get banned off of the platform for speaking your mind. Even though I scream every day about free speech and how it's being eroded. Yeah.
It's not freedom of speech when the things coming out of your mouth cause harm to others.
Yeah, well, but that's nuance, and apparently we're not at the point where we can have a nuanced conversation about that sort of thing. So it'll take a hell of a lot more effort than just some bumper sticker slogans that we can throw at each other.
Bumper stickers!
So thanks for the follow. Oh, getting quite a few follows. I see. Thanks for the follow, Celebrated Tiller. I'll take a look at that profile for a second. Yeah, I recently created an account with no avatar.
It's me.
No messages, timeouts, banned. Yeah. Gotta wonder what all these random bot follows are about. Kind of interesting. Yeah, right? Leave the LOL or leave the US. Yeah.
Like, I wish I could.
Thanks again for the bits, Allie. I see you shared with some more bits. Thanks so much for that.
It's like the same mentality with your job. Oh, you don't like your job, just leave. Okay, well, there's certain things that are tied to having that particular job.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it a little hard to just up and go.
Is that better, Allie? Can you see us a little better now? I know it shrinks it to a really tiny box when we have something else that we're looking at. Oh, and now you're just going to run away. That's good. Yeah. Okay. So somehow we ended up at this point when we were talking about the Civil War. I think it's because we were talking about amendments
Prison, labor.
and how they were breaking them as soon as they were written, basically. So a lot of legal and social progress for Black people. Things are going really well. It must have been some amazing times to live through, just seeing people that went from literally being thought of as chattel to actually having elected representatives and voting rights and legal standing in the community. But then also equally as disheartening when that stuff immediately started getting clawed back by really reactionary people.
It's their story, though.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's continue on with the book.
What?
Could assign Black children under 18
Nothing.
who had no
One
parents
distinguished
or whose
thing, y'all.
parents were poor to forced labor called apprenticeship
I have been
with
up
punishment for runaways.
for 15 hours.
Andrew Johnson clashed with senators and congressmen who, in some cases for reasons of justice, in others out of political calculation, supported equal rights and voting for the freedmen. These members of Congress succeeded in impeaching Johnson in 1868, using as an excuse that he had violated some minor statute, but the Senate fell one vote short of the 2/3 required to remove him from office.
One vote short. Wow, that's really close, actually. That's too bad. Sounds like a real POS, this Andrew Johnson. Not one that I've studied too much myself, but yeah, seems like you're run of the mill racist, you know, taking people's rights back, even if you don't have the legal standing to do so, but somehow getting away with it. Like, why did they impeach him for violating the Constitution? I don't know.
Why didn't they remove somebody else from office when they got impeached?
I don't know. You gotta wonder. I mean, you know, it's probably for something really cynical, like Democrats just wanted to have him around as a punching bag and a fundraiser, so that they can, you know, scream, we gotta raise more money. This is the most important election of our lifetime because Donald Trump is going to be a part of it. And that's you know,
That is
I'm sure they're already starting to call for that sort of thing.
my favorite sort of shit.
Yeah.
It's like protect abortion access now,
Honestly,
and
yeah.
I just want to be like,
You guys didn't do that though.
you had 50 years to do it.
You had
I
a
don't
lot
think
of
the $10
supermajority
is
options,
gonna change shit now.
opportunities to do that, and that didn't happen.
And now look what you did.
Yeah, so
Hope you're proud.
so that's probably the reason that the Democrats just finally let it go, except for the most actual progressive ones. And the Republicans, of course, they're not going to do that because, you know, he's my leader, right or wrong. That's basically their mentality.
That's why I can't handle those kids. If you cannot ask questions, you shouldn't be there.
Yeah, oh, it's true. So, yeah. So it's probably something similar at the time. Just one person deciding that they didn't want to take the political risk to vote for that, or that it would be cynically more advantageous to have a villain to fight against. But I don't know.
If
the
you
exact
can't
details.
see the villain, be the villain. fine. I should leave.
Anyway.
In the presidential election of that year, Republican Ulysses Grant was elected, winning by 300,000 votes, with 700,000 Negroes voting, and so Johnson was out as an obstacle.
Oh,
Now the
all
Southern
right.
states could come back into the Union only by
Sorry, it was too
approving the
boring.
new constitutional amendments. Whatever Northern politicians were doing to help their cause, Southern blacks were determined to make the most of their freedom, in spite of their lack of...
Just kidding. Thank you for coming on, Amanda. I really appreciate it.
Sure you do.
I do. It's just I'm trying to do a regular show, like a serious show, and you're like, oh. I know you don't mean to.
I have been up since
I know
5
you're
a.m..
really tired.
It is 8 p.m. now.
I know.
You need to be nice.
Yeah.
This is why people don't play with you.
Oh, who's not playing with me? Oh, okay. So people meaning you.
I'm people.
You are a person.
I am people.
You're not people.
All of us are.
Okay.
Me, myself, and I.
Oh, I got you now.
Talking about the royal we.
Anyway, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was fun.
Okay. Believe that when I see it. Get out.
Hey, James. How's it going?
Hi, James.
Amanda says hi as well.
I'm too tired.
Amanda's too tired. So Alyosha says, too bad money is basically the ruler of society. What if there was another standard? Well, that's true. And I mean, me personally, I as an anarchist, I would love to see a classless, stateless, moneyless society someday. We got a long way to go to get there. So, I mean, I would love just seeing the end of capitalism within my lifetime, even if it meant a very baseline level of socialism where people's needs were all met and it was not legal to be an owner unless you were also a worker in a business. Couldn't have some special ownership thing. People would make decisions about businesses collectively, democratically, not unilaterally. I would love to see us get at least that far. And that would go a long way to getting money out of politics, because you wouldn't have single figureheads at the top of corporations who could just funnel all the money to themselves and then basically donate unlimited amounts to whatever candidates they saw as protecting their interests the most. That would go a long way to getting money out of politics. Just having democratized workplaces. And then it would get a lot more people into politics and more people politically enfranchised if they had all of their basic needs met and were able to then have time to inform themselves politically, actually run for office without worrying about, spending too much money and losing it all. And, yep. There still could be lobbyists in that sort of a scenario. So yeah, it's not getting all of money out of politics, but the lobbyists would have to be more for entire companies rather than just the heads of companies. So it would democratize the charge of lobbyists. I mean, like I worked for a nonprofit once who hired a lobbyist for the state legislature to advocate for disability rights and stuff like that. So it definitely does happen in not-for-profit businesses. So I guess there's no reason why it couldn't continue if we outlawed private business or private ownership of the means of production. But yeah, I think it would be much less influential than now, because again, you might have some lobbyists, but they're not going to be able to be as paid as well as they are now. You're not going to have the high-powered lobbyists like we have today, because you don't have that one person that can funnel all the resources to themselves and then allocate it to the most powerful lobbyists. Yeah, nonprofits can be shady as well. there's a lot wrong with the nonprofit system, especially when it gets to things like foundations and charitable trusts and stuff like that, which are usually set up by very wealthy people to, in essence, launder their money. You know, they put family members on the board, and they can draw salaries of, you know, your average, you know, it could be $50,000-$60,000 a year just to attend a few board meetings, not really have any other duties beyond that point. So there's that, and then they can, you know, it's manipulating the legal system to hide money, to hide profit, and to still advocate for things you want. Like, you know, your nonprofit. I believe a nonprofit can, well, yeah, as we were saying, nonprofits can still hire lobbyists. So you could donate a ton of money to your foundation, and they could hire lobbyists to lobby on your behalf anyway. It's just a way of laundering your money, because then you don't pay taxes on that money that was a charitable gift, right? There was a really good episode of Ralph Nader's podcast on that. I'll see if I can find it. Let's continue. I'd like to get a little bit further in this, because I'm really not getting too far in this chapter. So let's take some time now. Well, I'll have a longer pause in between commentary. Let's continue on.
Land and resources. A study of blacks in Alabama in the first years after the war by historian Peter Colchin finds that they began immediately asserting their independence of whites, forming their own churches, becoming politically active, strengthening their family ties, trying to educate their children. Colchin disagrees with the contention of some historians that slavery had created a, quote, Sambo mentality among blacks. Quote, as soon as they were free, these supposedly dependent, childlike Negroes began acting like independent men and women, unquote. Negroes were now elected to Southern state legislatures, although in all these they were a minority, except in the lower house of the South Carolina legislature. A great propaganda campaign was undertaken north and south, one which lasted well into the 20th century in the history textbooks of American schools, to show that blacks were inept, lazy, corrupt, and ruinous to the governments of the South when they were in office. Undoubtedly, there was corruption, but one could hardly claim that blacks had invented political conniving, especially in the bizarre climate of financial finagling North and South after the Civil War. It was true that the public debt of South Carolina, $7 million in 1865, went up to $29 million in 1873, but the new legislature introduced free public schools for the first time into the state. Not only were 70,000 Negro children going to school by 1876, where none had gone before, but 50,000 white children were going to school where only 20,000 had attended in 1860.
So it's good for everybody.
Black voting in the period after 1869 resulted in 2 Negro members of the U.S. Senate, Hiram Revels and Blanche Bruce, both from Mississippi, and 20 congressmen, including 8 from South Carolina, 4 from North Carolina, 3 from Alabama, and 1 each from the other former Confederate states. This list would dwindle rapidly after 1876. The last black left Congress in 1901. A Columbia University scholar of the 20th century, John Burgess, referred to black Reconstruction as follows, quote, in place of government by the most intelligent and virtuous part of the people for the benefit of the governed, here was government by the most ignorant and vicious part of the population. A black skin means membership in a race of men which has never of itself succeeded in subjecting passion to reason, and has never, therefore, created civilization of any kind. One has to measure against those words the black leaders in the post-war South. For example, Henry McNeil Turner, who had escaped from peonage in South Carolina plantation at the age of 15. Taught himself to read and write, read law books while a messenger in a lawyer's office in Baltimore, and medical books while a handyman in a Baltimore medical school, served as chaplain to a Negro regiment, and then was elected to the first post-war legislature of Georgia. In 1868, the Georgia legislature voted to expel all its Negro members, 2 senators, 25 representatives, and Turner spoke to the Georgia House of Representatives. A black woman graduate student at Atlanta University later brought his speech to light. Quote, Mr. Speaker, I wish the members of this House to understand the position that I take. I hold that I am a member of this body, therefore, sir, I shall neither fawn or cringe before any party, nor stoop to beg them for my rights. I am here to demand my rights, and to hurl thunderbolts at the men who would dare to cross the threshold of my manhood. This scene presented in this house today is one unparalleled in the history of the world. Never in the history of the world has a man been arraigned before a body clothed with legislative, judicial, or executive functions, charged with the offense of being of a darker hue than his fellow men. It has remained for the state of Georgia in the very heart of the 19th century to call a man before the bar and there charge him with an act for which he is no more responsible than for the head which he carries upon his shoulders. The Anglo-Saxon race, sir, is a most surprising one. I was not aware that there was in the character of that race so much cowardice or so much pusillanimity. I tell you, sir, that this is a question which will not die today. This event shall be remembered by posterity for ages yet to come, and while the sun shall continue to climb the hills of heaven. We are told that if black men want to speak, they must speak through white trumpets. If black men want their sentiments expressed, they must be adulterated and sent through white messengers who will quibble and equivocate and evade as rapidly as the pendulum of a clock. The great question, sir, is this: am I a man? And if I am such, I claim the rights of a man. Why, sir, though we are not white, we have accomplished much. We have pioneered civilization here. We have built up your country. We have worked in your fields and garnered your harvests for 250 years. And what do we ask of you in return? Do we ask you for compensation for the sweat our fathers bore for you, for the tears you have caused, and the hearts you have broken, and the lives you have curtailed, and the blood you have spilled? Do we ask retaliation? We ask it not. We are willing to let the dead past bury its dead, but we ask you now for our rights. As black children went to school, they were encouraged by teachers, black and white, to express themselves freely, sometimes in catechism style. The records of a school in Louisville, Kentucky. Quote, "Teacher, now, children, you don't think white people are any better than you because they have straight hair and white faces?" Students, "No, sir." Teacher, "No. They are no better, but they are different. They possess great power. They formed this great government. They control this vast country. Now, what makes them different from you?" Students, "Money." Teacher, "Yes, but what enabled them to obtain it? How did they get their money?" Students, "Got it off us. Stole it off we all." Black women helped rebuild the post-war South. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, born free in Baltimore, self-supporting from the age of 13, working as a nursemaid, later as an abolitionist lecturer, reader of her own poetry, spoke all through the southern states after the war. She was a feminist, participant in the 1866 Women's Rights Convention, and founder of the National Association of Colored Women. In the 1890s, she wrote the first novel published by a black woman, Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted. In 1878, she described what she had seen and heard recently in the South. Quote, "An acquaintance of mine, who lives in South Carolina and has been engaged in mission work, reports that in supporting the family, women are the mainstay. That 2/3 of the truck gardening is done by them in South Carolina. That in the city, they are more industrious than the men. When the men lose their work through their political affiliations, the women stand by them and say, 'Stand by your principles.'" Through all the struggles to gain equal rights for blacks, certain black women spoke out on their special situation. Sojourner Truth, at a meeting of the American Equal Rights Association, said, quote, "There is a great stir about colored men getting their rights, but not a word about the colored women. And if colored men get their rights, and not colored women theirs, you see the colored men will be masters over the women, and it will be just as bad as it was before. So I am for keeping the thing going while things are stirring, because if we wait till it is still, it will take a great while to get it going again. I am above 80 years old. It is about time for me to be going. I have been 40 years a slave and 40 years free, and would be here 40 years more to have equal rights for all. I suppose I am kept here because something remains for me to do. I suppose I am yet to help break the chain. I have done a great deal of work as much as a man, but did not get so much pay. I used to work in the field and bind grain, keeping with the cradler, but men doing no more got twice as much pay. I suppose I am about the only colored woman that goes about to speak for the rights of the colored women. I want to keep the thing stirring, now that the ice is cracked." The constitutional amendments were passed, the laws for racial equality were passed, and the black man began to vote and to hold office. But so long as the Negro remained dependent on privileged whites for work, for the necessities of life, his vote could be bought or taken away by threat of force. Thus, laws calling for equal treatment became meaningless. While Union troops, including colored troops, remained in the South, this process was delayed. But the balance of military powers began to change. The Southern white oligarchy used its economic power to organize the Ku Klux Klan and other terrorist groups. Northern politicians began to weigh the advantage of the political support of impoverished blacks, maintained in voting and office only by force, against the more stable situation of a South returned to white supremacy, accepting Republican dominance and business legislation. It was only a matter of time before blacks would be reduced once again to conditions not far from slavery. Violence began almost immediately with the end of the war. In Memphis, Tennessee, in May of 1866, whites, on a rampage of murder, killed 46 Negroes, most of them veterans of the Union Army, as well as 2 white sympathizers. 5 Negro women were raped, 90 homes, 12...
Okay, yeah, so... I should actually put a content warning on these episodes. I apologize for that. But, yeah, we're talking about the Civil War. It's not going to be good stuff. So, yeah. Yeah. It's hard to even react to that kind of horrific behavior. I always feel at a loss of words when we come across these sorts of incidents. And yeah, these sorts of things are not taught in American schools. Like, this is all just glossed over. The war is done, and then we skip right to Teddy Roosevelt, basically, or I guess the assassination of Lincoln briefly, then Teddy Roosevelt is the next on the docket. None of this stuff gets covered.
12 schools and 4 churches were burned. In New Orleans, in the summer of 1866, another riot against blacks killed 35 Negroes and 3 whites. Mrs. Sarah Song testified before a congressional investigating committee. Have you been a slave? I have been a slave. What did you see of the rioting? I saw them kill my husband. It was on Tuesday night. Between 10 and 11 o'clock, he was shot in the head while he was in bed sick. There were between 20 and 30 men. They came into the room. Then one stepped back and shot him. He was not a yard from him. He put the pistol to his head and shot him 3 times. Then one of them kicked him, and another shot him again when he was down. He never spoke after he fell. They then went running right off and did not come back. The violence mounted through the late 1860s and early 1870s as the Ku Klux Klan organized raids, lynchings, beatings, burnings. For Kentucky alone, between 1867 and 1871, the National Archives lists 116 acts of violence. A sampling. 1. A mob visited Harrodsburg in Mercer County to take from jail a man named Robertson, November 14, 1867. 5. Sam Davis hung by a mob in Harrodsburg, May 28, 1868. 6. William Pierce hung by a mob in Christian, July 12, 1868. 7. George Roger hung by a mob in Bradsfordville, Martin County, July 11, 1868. 10. Silas Woodford, aged 60, badly beaten by disguised mob. 109. Negro killed by Ku Klux Klan in Hay County, January 14, 1871. A Negro blacksmith named Charles Caldwell, born a slave, later elected to the Mississippi Senate, and known as, quote, a notorious and turbulent Negro, unquote, by whites, was shot at by the son of a white Mississippi judge in 1868. Caldwell fired back and killed the man. Tried by an all-white jury, he argued self-defense and was acquitted. The first Negro to kill a white in Mississippi and go free after a trial. But on Christmas Day, 1875, Caldwell was shot to death by a white gang. It was a sign. The old white rulers were taken back political power in Mississippi and everywhere else in the South.
And who was stopping them? Certainly not the federal government at this point, because they had what they wanted more than anything, which was the country put back together politically. So yeah, great. The Civil War did end slavery and did result in progress. at the same time, North shouldn't have patted themselves in the back too hard, because they let things be clawed back pretty quickly. And of course, not quite to the point of what it used to be, but still, it's, 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
As white violence rose in the 1870s, the national government, even under President Grant, became less enthusiastic about defending blacks and certainly not prepared to arm them. The Supreme Court played its gyroscopic role of pulling the other branches of government back to more conservative directions when they went too far.
Oh, how about that? Even back then, the Supreme Court acting conservatively. Oh, admiring themselves or entangling themselves directly in the political thicket, huh? Who would have imagined? But of course, because it's for conservative causes, then it just kind of gets overlooked. Conservatism is just seen as the default position, apparently.
It began interpreting the 14th Amendment, passed presumably for racial equality, in a way that made it impotent for this purpose. In 1883, the Civil Rights Act of 1875, outlawing discrimination against Negroes using public facilities, was nullified by the Supreme Court, which said, quote, individual invasion of individual rights is not...
It's so rare that the Supreme Court has ever done anything good, it seems. Like, sure, maybe, I'm sure there are stuff that is less overtly political that they have resolved that might have been good, but when it comes to these big things, time and time again, they're the ones saying, oh, no, you're going too far to interpret it in a way that would give more rights to more people. We have to allow you to take rights away, because that's what freedom is, the freedom to take away rights from people you don't like.
The subject matter of the amendment. The 14th Amendment, it said, was aimed at state action only. No state shall. A remarkable dissent was written by Supreme...
No state shall. Yeah. Still, like, how... that just takes so much logical gymnastics to get to that point. Saying no state shall engage in discrimination. Saying that somehow means that you can't pass a law against private businesses engaging in discrimination because they are not the state. The state is then allowing discrimination by omission, by not being able to prevent it. So,
Supreme Court Justice John Harlan, himself a former slave owner in Kentucky, who said there was constitutional justification for banning private discrimination. He noted that the 13th Amendment, which banned slavery, applied to individual plantation owners, not just the state.
he
then
that's a
argued
good point.
that discrimination was a badge of slavery and similarly outlawable. He pointed also to the first clause of the 14th Amendment, saying that anyone born in the United States was a citizen, and to the clause in Article 4, Section 2, saying, the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states.
He's making all the good arguments for upholding the Constitution, but somehow the Supreme Court is... I'm guessing they're going to go against what he says.
Harlan was fighting a force greater than logic or justice. The mood of the court reflected a new coalition of...
Oh, the court isn't just facts over feelings, is it? It has a political agenda, and it chooses to interpret things charitably or uncharitably, depending on what that agenda is aiming at. How about that? Who would have thought?
Northern industrialists and Southern businessmen planters. The culmination of this mood came in the decision of 1896, Plessy v. Ferguson, when the court ruled that a railroad could segregate black and white if the segregated facilities were equal.
Yep, equal to the letter of the law, but of course, it never plays out that way. This is what all this This is why I'm sorry, but pure logic bros are never going to get us to the point where we have a perfect set of morally defensible standards. Because there's always some way to interpret things badly in bad faith. Yeah. Because then the Ben Shapiro's of the time are just like, well, it says that things can be separate but equal, so obviously anything that is separate is equal, and that's the sort of logic that gets you to. And of course, they never were. They never were. Stephen King, what was his book? 1964, something like that. It was 1960 something anyway, and it was a book about segregation. And it talks about how separate but equal in practice meant that white people would have, this may be, he may have been making up the situation just for illustration purposes, but it would be like at a rest stop, white people would have access to the bathroom with plumbing and running water and soap dispensers, all that stuff. And the equal facilities for the black people would be having to walk down a path out back to a board set across two stumps, and that was their equal bathroom. And of course, we've all seen pictures of like the segregated water fountains that were nowhere near equal, and yeah, I don't know. Let's continue on.
Quote, "The object of the amendment was undoubtedly to enforce the absolute equality of the two races before the law, but in the nature of things it could not have been intended to abolish distinctions based upon color, or to enforce social as distinguished from political equality, or a commingling of the two races upon terms unsatisfactory to either." Harlan again dissented. "Our Constitution is colorblind." It was the year 1877 that spelled out clearly and dramatically what was happening. When the year opened, the presidential election of the past November was in bitter dispute. The Democratic candidate, Samuel Tilden, had 184 votes and needed one more to be elected. His popular vote was greater than 250,000. The Republican candidate, Rutherford Hayes, had 166 electoral votes. 3 states not yet counted had a total of 19 electoral votes. If Hayes could get all of those, he would have 185 and be president. This is what his managers proceeded to arrange. They made concessions to the Democratic Party and the white South, including an agreement to remove Union troops from the South, the last military obstacle to the reestablishment of white supremacy there. Northern political and economic interests needed powerful allies and stability in the face of national crisis. The country had been in economic depression.
Oh, James, you're seeing ads. That sucks. Yeah, if anyone doesn't want to see the ads, I probably should get into the habit of seeing. Oh yeah, it looks like I just came up to having streamed for 1 hour, so I should get into the habit of rolling my ads myself, because I believe they're shorter when I do it. 3 of 6. Yep. But thank you guys for watching the ads too. It actually does help the channel. So if you're unable to give, so that you don't see the ads, if you're not able to do a donation. And you know what? I never looked into whether or not there was a blanket sort of subscription you can get to Twitch. Let's take this moment to find out while people are away. Because they had mentioned something at some point about some sort of price you could pay to not see ads on any channel that wouldn't have to go to a specific channel. Let's see if anything came up. No, I don't need to know how to subscribe. Let's just see if we can, maybe the paid is what's getting me caught up. Maybe a general Twitch subscription to all channels. Yeah, I know about Prime Gaming. So that's different tiers. That doesn't help either. On Twitch. Not finding what I'm looking for. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not finding it. I thought they'd talked about just a general subscription at some point to not see ads. But I'm not seeing it anywhere. If anyone finds out anything about that, let me know. And we are back. All right, let's continue on.
Since 1873.
Actually making some
and by
good
1877,
progress,
farmers and workers were beginning to rebel. As C. Van Woodward puts it in his History of the 1877 Compromise, Reunion and Reaction, quote, "It was a depression year, the worst year of the severest depression yet experienced. In the East, labor and the unemployed were in a bitter and violent temper. Out West, a tide of agrarian radicalism was rising. From both East and West came threats against the elaborate structure of protective tariffs, national banks, railroad subsidies, and monetary arrangements upon which the new economic order was founded." It was a time for reconciliation between Southern and Northern elites. Woodward asks, quote, "Could the South be induced to combine with the Northern conservatives and become a prop instead of a menace to the new capitalist order?" With billions of dollars worth of slaves gone, the wealth of the Old South was wiped out. They now looked to the national government for help: credit, subsidies, flood control projects. The United States in 1865 had spent $103,294,501 on public works, but the South received only $9,469,363. For instance, while Ohio got over $1 million, Kentucky, her neighbor south of the river, got $25,000. While Maine got $3 million, Mississippi got $136,000. While $83 million had been given to subsidize the Union Pacific and Central Pacific railroads, thus creating a transcontinental railroad through the North, there was no such subsidy for the South. So one of the things the South looked for was federal aid to the Texas and Pacific Railroad.
I mean, also the North was much more populous and infrastructure than the South to begin with, so kind of makes sense. It's like how cities tend to get more tax dollars than an equally sized rural area. There's more need in the more populous areas.
Railroad. Woodward says, quote, "By means of appropriations, subsidies, grants, and bonds, such as Congress had so lavishly showered upon capitalist enterprise in the North, the South might yet mend its fortunes, or at any rate, the fortunes of a privileged elite. These privileges were sought with the backing of poor white farmers, brought into the new alliance against blacks. The farmers wanted railroads, harbor improvements, flood control, and of course land, not knowing yet how these would be used not to help them, but to exploit them. For example, as the first act of the new North-South capitalist cooperation, the Southern Homestead Act, which had reserved all federal lands, 1/3 of the area of Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, for farmers who would work the land, was repealed. This enabled absentee speculators and lumbermen to move in and buy up much of this land, and so the deal was made. The proper committee was set up by both houses of Congress to decide where the electoral votes would go. The decision was they belonged to Hayes, and he was now president. As Woodward sums it up, quote, The Compromise of 1877 did not restore the old order in the South. It did assure the dominant whites political autonomy and non-intervention in matters of race policy, and promised them a share in the blessings of the new economic order. In return, the South became, in effect, a satellite of the dominant region. The importance of the new capitalism in overturning what black power existed in the post-war South is affirmed by Horace Mann Bond's study of Alabama Reconstruction, which shows after 1868, quote, a struggle between different financiers, unquote. Yes, racism was a factor, but, quote, accumulation of capital and the men who controlled them were as unaffected by attitudinal prejudices as it is possible to be. Without sentiment, without emotion, those who sought profit from an exploitation of Alabama's natural resources turned other men's prejudices and attitudes to their own account, and did so with skill and a ruthless acumen. It was an age of coal and power, and northern Alabama had both. Quote, the bankers in Philadelphia and New York, and even in London and Paris, had known this for almost 2 decades. The only thing lacking was transportation. And so, in the mid-1870s, Bond notes, northern bankers began appearing in the directories of southern railroad lines. J.P. Morgan appears by 1875 as director for several lines in Alabama and Georgia. In the year 1886, Henry Grady, an editor of the Atlanta Constitution, spoke at a dinner in New York. In the audience were J.P. Morgan, H.M. Flagler, an associate of Rockefeller, Russell Sage, and Charles Tiffany. His talk was called The New South, and his theme was, let bygones be bygones. Let us have a new era of peace and prosperity. The Negro was a prosperous laboring class. He had the fullest protection of the laws and the friendship of the Southern people. Grady joked about the Northerners who sold slaves to the South and said the South could now handle its own race problem. He received a rising ovation, and the band played Dixie. That same month, an article in the New York Daily Tribune, quote, the leading coal and iron men of the South who have been in this city during the last 10 days will go home to spend the Christmas holidays, thoroughly satisfied with the business of the year and more than hopeful for the future. And
Just want to point out, too, that I'm sure we're definitely going to come back to this in future chapters, but this era, this incredibly reactionary era, the reaction to Reconstruction from 1877 until basically the end of the century, is known as the Gilded Age. This is the time that, not coincidentally, when they're making all sorts of reactionary laws to take away people's rights and freedoms and uphold near slavery and segregation and continue to hold back suffrage for all American women and all racial minorities at this point, as much as they can. It's kind of no coincidence that goes along with one of the worst periods of capitalism in the nation's history, when there was very little regulation and incredible, unfathomable wealth generation, the likes of which had never been seen before. And this is the time of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and all the robber barons making their fortunes during this time. So if you needed any more evidence that libertarians are firmly on the right, this is the sort of era that they want to go back to, where there's minimal to no business regulation. People are routinely scammed, and it's all just buyer beware. Virtually no protections and safety nets for working class people, consumers, anybody really that doesn't own stuff. And just tremendous concentrations of wealth into the hands of fewer and fewer and fewer people. Even as the railroads start cannibalizing each other until they build towards monopoly. Hey, how about that? Tons of monopolies come out of the Gilded Age, so much so that they had to institute the nation's first antitrust laws. I think the next book that I would like to do after People's History is The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, which is a chronicling. It's a fictionalized version of this time, but he got his stuff from what he saw and the people that he talked to, and just seeing that era firsthand. But I think it's a really great portrait of just how horrible unfettered capitalism is and always will be, unless you are the luckiest of the lucky few. And how there's really the only solution that Sinclair comes to in the book is that we need to push for more socialism, and really that's the only answer to any ills that come from capitalism. Even if we have a very Scandinavian democratic socialist version of capitalism with lots of safety nets and stuff like that, it's the same thing, just less damaging. So for now, you can just go check out Gilded Age stuff, just putting that down as a marker. But yeah, we'll talk more about that in the future. And as I say, yeah, we'll cover the jungle. All right, moving on. I think, let's see. We have 17 minutes, and it's 20 minutes till 9. So I think at the 1.25 speed, let's make sure we're still at that speed. Yeah, I think we can do it if I have minimal commentary from now until then. So let's see if we can get to the end of this chapter.
They have good reason to be. The time for which they have been waiting for nearly 20 years, when Northern capitalism would be convinced not only of the safety, but of the immense profits to be gained from the investment of their money in developing the fabulously rich coal and iron resources of Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia, has come at last. The North, it must be recalled, did not have to undergo a revolution in its thinking to accept the subordination of the Negro. When the Civil War ended, 19 of the 24 northern states did not allow blacks to vote. By 1900, all the southern states, in new constitutions and new statutes, had written into law the disenfranchisement and segregation of Negroes. And a New York...
This is just, I think of all the periods of being alive in the U.S., this would be one of the worst times. This just sounds like a horrible area of regression, a horrible era of regression. I mean, it's a wonder they didn't just reinstitute slavery the way things were going at this point. It was so reactionary. Taking away the rights of people to vote that previously could have them. How that could ever be seen as equal protection under the law, yeah, it's beyond me.
York Times editorial said, quote, announced the suppression of the Negro vote. The necessity of it under the supreme law of self-preservation is candidly recognized, unquote.
Oh, here we go. Some early versions of the Great Replacement theory that is so popular amongst reactionaries of today. Here we are over 100 years later. People still making the same dumb arguments that, oh, this is all just about preservation of the white people and all this stuff. It's never what it's about. It's about maintaining power. It's the preservation of power at the exclusion of everyone else and nothing more.
While not written into the law in the North, the counterpart in racist thought and practice was there, an item in the Boston Transcript, September 25, 1895. Quote, a colored man who gives his name as Henry W. Turner was arrested last night on suspicion of being a highway robber. He was taken this morning to Black's studio where he had his picture taken for the Rogues Gallery. That angered him, and he made himself as disagreeable as he possibly could. Several times along the way to the photographers, he resisted the police with all his might and had to be clubbed. In the post-war literature, images of the Negro came mostly from Southern white writers like Thomas Nelson Page, who in his novel Red Rock referred to a Negro character as, quote, a hyena in a cage, a reptile, a species of worm, a wild beast, unquote. And interspersed with paternalistic urgings of friendship for the Negro, Joel Chandler Harris in his Uncle Remus stories would have Uncle Remus say, quote, put a spelling book in a N-word's hands and right den and dere you loses a plow hand. I can take a barrel stave and fling most sense into a N-word in 1 minute. Then all the schoolhouses betwixt dis and the state or Michigan. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
In this atmosphere, it was no
In case you couldn't tell that Jesus Christ was the narrator of our book here. Just completely flabbergasted at just how horribly racist that book is.
wonder that those Negro leaders most accepted in white society, like the educator Booker T. Washington, a one-time White House guest of Theodore Roosevelt, urged Negro political passivity. Invited by the white organizers of the Cotton States and International Exposition in Atlanta in 1895 to speak, Washington urged the Southern Negro to, quote, cast down your bucket where you are, unquote. That is, to stay in the South, to be farmers, mechanics, domestics, perhaps even to attain to the professions. He urged white employers to hire Negroes rather than immigrants of, quote, strange tongue and habits, unquote. Negroes, quote, without strikes and labor wars.
Oh, great. So now we see them pitting the lower classes against each other and using, it's racism versus xenophobia. Guess who wins in both situations, both scenarios, as both are propped up as legitimate.
Were the, quote, most patient, faithful, law-abiding, and unresentful people the world has seen, unquote.
And then conversely, too, this is the reason that we need intersectionality in any sort of progressive movement of any kind, any sort of left movement. Because if we don't have intersectionality, if we don't bring along everyone who is oppressed by the current system of the day, then they will use that against us to fracture off bits here and there until we don't have a movement anymore. We can't win unless we all win, and that has to be the basis of leftism in general. It just has to be, because we're not going to win otherwise.
He said, quote, the wisest among my race understand that the agitation of questions of social equality is the extremest folly, unquote. Perhaps Washington saw this as a necessary...
Good to see a jet, too. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's the old divide and conquer, and the thing is, it works. I mean, you see it happen all the time on the left now with people just sowing division. Oh, it's down to even guilt by association. Oh, you haven't denounced the comments of so-and-so video creator, and they said some really questionable stuff. Well, then you're just as bad as them. It's just a stupid way to be. It's a stupid way to be. If you're criticizing someone, that can be legitimate if you're doing it in a way where they can get better. If you're just doing it to smack down an opponent and crush people that you find distasteful or not as pure as what you would like them to be, then that ends up just doing damage to the movement. Exactly, yeah. But the thing is that has Maupin, these are not even leftists at all. I don't think they certainly don't consider themselves progressive by any means, or liberal. They consider themselves conservative to begin with. You can't be socially conservative and economically leftist. That just doesn't work. That's just being a nosball, basically. So yes, there are edge cases where people's views are so reactionary and non-intersectional, I might add, that yeah, they cannot be part of the movement. But that's not, these are edge cases, and most people that get canceled and put out of the left movement and endlessly roasted online do not rise to the level of a Maupin or a Haas. Yeah, MAGA communism. When you're saying you're going to be a MAGA communist, you're basically giving up the game. It's clear what you're after. When you're saying that the only difference between you and Alexander Dugin is that you don't believe that history inevitably is more and more progressive as time goes on, then you're giving up the game. Yeah. That was a quote from Maupin. So, yeah. But those people don't really have much of a following anymore. Even Maupin was too extreme for CPUSA, so they kicked him out, which is the best thing that they've probably ever done. He was such a grifter and a user of people. He used CPUSA just for his own aggrandizement and enrichment, to have people go out and sell his books at basically less than minimum wage. Yeah, beyond and then there's the allegations of impropriety and the way that he used and abused people in his personal life too, which he hasn't really strongly said otherwise. He just said, "You all know me. Come on, come on." That's basically his defense. Yeah, there's no redeeming qualities at that point, and it's okay to exclude those people from our movement. But that's not to say that we don't want a world where they would still have all of their needs met as well. It's not as though we put in laws to, you know, say everyone gets free food, shelter, and clothing, unless you don't meet a certain political litmus test, because that's not what we're about. We gamble on the fact that there are more people that would be good people if they had all of their needs met than there are reactionaries who would destroy everything. And also the fact that with power being spread out further and further, those few who would use great power to oppress others have a much harder time gaining all of that power in the world that we want. Elmer Gantry. I have no idea what you're referring to there, Allie. But anyway, yeah, trying to finish up. Let's finish up.
Tactic of survival in a time of hangings and burnings of Negroes throughout the South. It was a low point for black people in America. Thomas Fortune, a young black editor of the New York Globe, testified before a Senate committee in 1883 about the situation of the Negro in the United States. He spoke of widespread poverty, of government betrayal, of desperate Negro attempts to educate themselves. The average wage of Negro farm laborers in the South was about 50 cents a day, Fortune said. He was usually paid in orders, not money, which he could use only at a store controlled by the planter, a system of fraud. The Negro farmer, to get the wherewithal to plant his crop, had to promise it to the store. And when everything was added up at the end of the year, he was in debt. So his crop was constantly owed to someone, and he was tied to the land with the records kept by the planter and storekeeper, so that the...
Yeah, sharecropping is not so far removed from slavery. It is a system designed to entrap people further and further into debt. So instead of a master's whip keeping you on keeping you farming for the master, you have debt doing the job for you. So functionally, there's no real difference between that and slavery, except for that you get to leave the property once in a while, I would assume. But that's not really that much of a difference.
Negroes, quote, are swindled and kept forever in debt, unquote. As for supposed laziness, quote, I am surprised that a larger number of them do not go to fishing, hunting, and loafing.
Oh. Elmer Gantry is a satirical novel written by Sinclair Lewis in 1926 that presents aspects of the religious activity of the United States in the fundamentalist and evangelicalistic circles and the attitudes of the 1920s public towards it. Reverend Dr. Elmer Gantry, protagonist, is attacked by drinking, making easy money, but eventually renounces tobacco and alcohol and chasing women after various forays into evangelism. He becomes a successful Methodist minister despite his hypocrisy. Yeah, I have not heard of that book, but maybe I will check it out. James says they did that with miners. Yup, with company stores, scrip. Yeah, that sort of thing. Same sort of scenario. It's basically getting you. I mean, it's not so different than allowing for a minimum wage today, where you could not live on your own. You would have to have a minimum of something like 3 jobs full time at minimum wage. So that would be 120 hours a week, minimum wage, just to afford a 1-bedroom apartment on your own at market rate in most places in America. So not so far different from that today. Still a little better today, because you know you can live with roommates and family and stuff like that. But functionally, you don't have much more freedom, especially if you're spending 120 hours a week working. Like, I don't think anyone works quite that much. That would be really difficult just to line up that much full-time work to do. Yeah, yeah. It's just it would be impossible, basically. So, still, yeah.
Unquote. Fortune spoke of, quote, the penitentiary system of the South with its infamous chain gang, the object being to terrorize the blacks and furnish victims for contractors who purchase the labor of these wretches from the state for a song. The white man who shoots a Negro always goes free, while the Negro who steals a hog is sent to the chain gang for 10 years. Many Negroes fled. About 6,000 black people left Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi and migrated to Kansas to escape violence and poverty. Frederick Douglass and some other leaders thought this was a wrong tactic, but migrants rejected such advice. Quote, "We have found no leader to trust but God overhead of us," unquote, one said. Henry Adams, another black migrant, illiterate, a veteran of the U.S. Army, told a Senate committee in 1880 why he left Shreveport, Louisiana. Quote, "We see that the whole South, every state in the South, had got into the hands of the very men that held us slaves," unquote. Even in the worst periods, Southern Negroes continued to meet to organize in self-defense. Herbert Aptheker reprints 13 documents of meetings, petitions, and appeals to Negroes in the 1880s in Baltimore, Louisiana, the Carolinas, Virginia, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Kansas, showing the spirit of defiance and resistance of blacks all over the South. This in the face of over 100 lynchings a year by this time. Despite the apparent hopelessness of the situation, there were black leaders who thought Booker T. Washington wrong in advocating caution and moderation. John Hope, a young black man in Georgia who heard Washington's Cotton Exposition speech, told students at a Negro college in Nashville, Tennessee, quote, "If we are not striving for equality, in heaven's name, for what are we living? I regard it as cowardly and dishonest for any of our colored men to tell white people or colored people that we are not struggling for equality. Yes, my friends, I want equality, nothing less. Now catch your breath, for I am going to use an adjective. I am going to say we demand social equality. I am no wild beast, nor am I an unclean thing. Rise, brothers. Come, let us possess this land. Be discontented. Be dissatisfied. Be as restless as the tempestuous billows on the boundless sea. Let your discontent break mountain high against the wall of prejudice and swamp it to the very foundation." Another black man who came to teach at Atlanta University, W.E.B. Du Bois, saw the late 19th century betrayal of the Negro as part of a larger happening in the United States. Something happening not only to poor blacks, but to poor whites. In his book, Black Reconstruction, written in 1935, he said, quote, "God wept, but that mattered little to an unbelieving age. What mattered most was that the world wept and still is weeping and blind with tears and blood, for there began to rise in America in 1876 a new capitalism and a new enslavement of labor." Du Bois saw this new capitalism as part of a process of exploitation and bribery taking place in all the, quote, civilized countries of the world. Quote, "Home labor in cultured lands, appeased and misled by a ballot whose power the dictatorship of vast capitals strictly curtailed, was bribed by high-wage and political office to unite in an exploitation of white, yellow, brown, and black labor in lesser lands." Was Du Bois right that in the growth of American capitalism before and after the Civil War, whites as well as blacks were in some sense becoming slaves? So ends Chapter 9 of Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States.
All right, that's the end of the chapter. We may start off next week. I'll listen ahead and see if the commentary from the narrator is worth getting into. I think this is I think they mentioned at the beginning, this is one of the most difficult chapters for them to read because there's just so much horrific stuff that happens. Slavery was definitely the most disgusting part of American history. just, yeah. Again, words fail. It's hard to know even, it's hard to say anything that really can capture the enormity of just how inhumane the practice was. Good that it's gone, of course, for the most part. Although there's that gaping loophole in the 13th Amendment. But progress is very slow. Very slow. And I wonder, let's look ahead just a little bit and see what is... Yeah, does human nature change that much? Human nature, I say, people bring up human nature a lot, especially when they're arguing about capitalism and whether or not it's the best system we could ever hope for. And they'll say things like, it's just human nature to be greedy and human nature to accumulate power and stuff like that. So socialism could never work because it works against human nature. I would disagree with that, first of all. I don't think it is human nature to just hoard and take away from the people that you live with, all for yourself and the select few people that you like. I don't think that's human nature, necessarily, or it's certainly not all of human nature. It's not the overriding force in human nature. But beyond that, the easy retort to that is, okay, if that is human nature to be greedy and self-serving and to stab everyone in the back on your way to the top, why condone a system that rewards that sort of thing? Why should we keep that system that goes along with the worst elements of human nature going? Why should we keep that going? Why not build a system that actively fights against it? I mean, you could equally argue that it's human nature to be wary of people that are different than you, that you're not familiar with growing up. There's a built-in xenophobia that keeps us safe as mammals. Well, okay, even if that's true, we've managed to create a civilization that actively fights against that urge, where you can walk down the street, see all kinds of strangers, all kinds of weird people that you never might have otherwise encountered in bygone ages, and you can have a reasonable amount of assurance that they are not going to attack you, and there's no need to attack them. That's a huge middle finger to, quote unquote, human nature. So regardless of what human nature is, we can build systems that promote it or go against it. So we should build a system that goes against it if it is, or at least the worst parts of it, because it is beneficial for the whole.
What are we fighting now?
Nothing, it's just the end of the chapter, so I was kind of summing up things about human nature and so forth. Look for the helpers. That's a good way to end things, Alyosha. One of my favorite Mr. Rogers quotes. And anytime you see something that's horrible, that you cannot control, look for the helpers. There's always good people out there who will rush into dangerous situations and help others without any thoughts of their own safety or their own benefit or, getting any sort of recognition afterward, or even that there might be an afterward. They don't necessarily even give thought to that. So that's a good way to end things. So that closes out a very horrible chapter of this book in terms of what it was dealing with. And next, let's see what we move on to next. In fact, we'll take...
You finished a chapter. I just had to leave, so you could.
But I enjoy our chats too, though. Amanda was saying that she had to leave so I could finish the chapter. So, but I do very much enjoy.
Science was so preoccupied with whether or not
Yeah.
they could. Never stopped to consider. They should.
Thank you, Dr. Ian Malcolm.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here.
I don't know how much of that is being picked up by the microphone, but Amanda's quoting Dr. Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park. You can probably guess the quote. So let's see. Chapter 10, Zin focuses on the oft. ignored story of early labor organizers in the United States and how state power conspired with capital to stamp out the people's movements. Interesting how that works. In the Gilded Age of American capitalism, it's virtual fascism, the complete entwinement of state and private power to crush minorities and their ability to organize with one another. What's that?
I would like to be part of that
Sure.
conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
Let me share with you all the efforts that occur off camera.
Okay. So yeah, that's what we'll cover next time. We'll get into that. Chapter 10, oh my goodness, is a long one. A 2-hour section of the book.
I call 3 weeks. If I don't end up on camera, 2 weeks.
Okay. I guess this chapter was 2 hours, 17 minutes, so yeah, maybe it is about the same. But yeah, it might be a couple more. I haven't been really great about keeping up with this streaming regularly. It's the busy time of the year. We just put all our plants out on the deck. I'm constantly planting and growing and getting stuff going. Forgetting to make kombucha. Thank you for reminding me again when I can't do anything about it.
You're welcome.
Apartments.com. Oh, thanks, Allie. Yeah, that's the Jeff Goldblum quote I was referencing. It's his apartments.com spot.
That was a genius move on their part. Let's just talk about that.
To use Jeff Goldblum as their spokesman? Yeah, that was a genius move. I don't think I've ever seen something that Jeff Goldblum did that I was like, it's not for me.
I've seen you say to Jeff Goldblum.
What?
The show he has on Disney about how stuff.
I really like that show. What do you mean?
I try to watch a whole bunch of it, and you're like, no.
I'm not always in the mood for that show, but I always love watching Jeff Goldblum do his stuff.
Which I think translates to maybe,
No, it doesn't. You're stretching.
Maybe you think Jeff Goldblum is a garbage person.
Wow, that is really a stretch. You're not going to need to do any yoga tonight, I'll tell you that.
Wow.
That kind of a stretch.
You made that kind of pun up all by yourself?
I did, on the spot.
Wow.
That's the kind of entertainment I bring to this platform.
I see.
Best place to find a place. Thank you, Ellie. All right, well, thank you all for joining me tonight. We're gonna raid into Epic Prawn because I'm assuming that's where at least 2/3 of you are gonna be going anyway. So we might as well just help you out in your journey.
What's Epic Prawn?
Epic Prawn is another streamer.
Is it about seafood?
No, I don't actually know the backstory of Epic Prawn's moniker.
What kind of person are you if you don't know?
I just know them online. Anyway, they're a really cool streamer. They do fun gaming stuff mostly, but also political things. Now and again.
Every day is a political thing now.
Well, yeah, it's hard to not be political in this age. Ugh.
Oh, that's too political.
Anyway, we're gonna start the raid. Thank you all for joining. Hope to see you next
Bye-bye.
time. Thanks for
Bye-bye now.
thanks. Adding the flight attendant.
The flight attendant?
Flight attendant. Bye-bye now.
I was more so going for Barney, but...
I don't think Barney says bye-bye.
Yes, he does.
Whatever. Starting the raid. Stick with me.
He's a big, dumb, purple dinosaur.
See you guys next
Of
time.
course he says bye-bye.
Okay.
But then the kids never leave. It's part of the problem with Barney.